is Encore.
Cool.
The stories behind the songs.
Thank you.
Here's iHeartRadio's Miles Galloway.
All these words I don't just say. I'm Miles Galloway, and this is the story of Metallica's Nothing Else Matters. Although our story ostensibly begins in the 90s, let's take a moment or two to look back at Metallica's wild and wonderful career throughout the 1980s. Originally founded by current members, singer and rhythm guitarist James Hetfield and drummer Lars Ulrich, alongside bassist Ron McGovney and lead guitarist Dave Mustaine, Metallica actually parted ways with both McGovney and Mustaine due to various personal and professional conflicts before recording and releasing their 1983 debut album, controversially titled Kill 'Em All. McGovney was quickly replaced by revered bassist, the now late Cliff Burton, while Mustaine was replaced by legendary member to this day, solo master Kirk Hammett. Despite being fired from the band and having most of his solos reworked on Kill 'Em All during the recording sessions by the more than capable Hammett, Mustaine was still given multiple writing credits on the album, giving him a bit of mythical status amongst Metallica fans in his own right. As most metal fans know, the mercurial Mustaine would go on to form his own metal powerhouse band Megadeth soon after his departure. Still an incredibly rough-around-the-edges thrash metal band, Cliff Burton would have a massive influence on the maturing of Metallica for their second album, Ride the Lightning. Burton would co-write every track on the album, including their first ever power ballad, Fade to Black, which introduced fans to a slightly softer-sounding side of Metallica for the very first time. Complete with acoustic guitars, longing vocals, and lyrics inclusive of the phrase, "Nothing Matters," the song was a bleak piece of work that grew in its heaviness as the song progressed, with Hetfield telling Guitar World, "That song was a big step forward for us. It was pretty much our first ballad, so we knew it would freak people out. Recording that song, I learned how frustrating acoustic guitar can be. You can hear every squeak, so I had to be careful. I was pretty depressed at the time because our gear had just been stolen, and we'd been thrown out of our manager's house for breaking shit and drinking his liquor cabinet dry. It's a suicide song, and we got a lot of flack for it. But we also got hundreds of letters from kids telling us how they related to the song and that it made them feel better." Metallica would release their follow-up to Ride the Lightning in 1986 with Master of Puppets. No longer just making music for the underground metalheads of the world, Puppets marked Metallica's major label debut with Elektra Records. The album was roundly received as one of, if not the greatest metal album of the time, with critics noting how much Burton's influence, in particular, had progressed the band's sound. The album would spend an impressive 72 weeks on the Billboard album charts and would become Metallica's first ever gold record upon release. Puppets would eventually go nearly 8 times platinum, with new peaks and valleys of sales and streams over the decades as new generations of metalheads discovered the genre and its crown jewel. The title track and only official single from Master of Puppets is an 8.5-minute ride that showcases the band's tempo-bending thrash roots, prog rock breakdowns, and pump-up guitar shredding that at times makes you feel like you're in a video game about to defeat the final boss. Speaking of that, you may recall that the song was most recently immortalized in Season 4 of Stranger Things, with fan-favorite character Eddie Munson heroically playing the title track in the upside-down dimension to lure away the universe's vicious monsters. Hellfire Club forever, am I right? Tragedy would strike Metallica in September of 1986, mere months after MOP's release, as Cliff Burton would die in a bus accident in Sweden while on tour promoting the record. Burton was only 24 years old when he was ejected from the window of Metallica's tour bus as it skidded off the road suddenly while the band members slept. The bus would land on top of him, killing him instantly. While the fault of the crash was hotly and legally debated at the time, ultimately Metallica's tour bus driver was found not to be at fault for the freak accident. By 1987, Metallica would find their necessary replacement for Burton, bassist Jason Newsted. Years later, Newsted would tell VH1's That Metal show that he secured the gig by stealthily finding a Metallica setlist, learning all the songs on it to note perfection, and demoing them out for Ulrich, who hired him 2 days later. With Newsted in the band, Metallica geared up to release their final album of the 80s, called And Justice for All. By this point, Metallica had very much made a name for themselves as the premier metal band, and justice would prove it, peaking at number 6 on the Billboard album charts, going double platinum across its album cycle. Mainstream critical success would also soon follow for the band, although they would lose out on winning the first and only ever Best Hard Rock Metal Performance Vocal or Instrumental Grammy Award to the very much not a metal band, Jethro Tull's very much not a metal album, Crest of a Knave, in 1989. But Metallica's song One would snag them the inaugural Best Metal Performance Award in retribution at the following year's ceremony. Eventually, And Justice for All would follow in the footsteps of its pivotal predecessor, going more than 8 times platinum to date. Now, you may be thinking by this point that this is truly unprecedented success for a metal band. Of course, there's always a place in music for aggressive, heavy tunes, but as the 80s turned to the 90s, you would be forgiven for assuming that the roughly 4 to 5 million records sold in America across 4 monster albums was about as good as it could get for any metal band, and perhaps they'd finally hit their glass ceiling. But Metallica, simply put, we're not just any metal band, and we're ready to change the way the world perceived heavy metal forever. In constructing their magnum opus, Metallica had one initial goal from the get-go: write shorter songs. Now, perhaps that doesn't sound like some sort of profound artistic epiphany. After all, shorter is a relative term, and a quick glimpse at Metallica's 80s back catalogue shows that the group had no problem releasing 7, 8, even 9-minute face melters. So, almost anything less would be shorter, right? But as Kirk Hammett would tell Much, Metallica wanted to challenge themselves in a whole new way.
Can we expect something totally different from Metallica?
I don't know if totally different is the right way of phrasing it, but I mean, I think we've taken a pretty sharp, turn. The Ride the Lightning album to Master Puppets to And Justice for All were all different albums from each other, but kind of in the same direction. And I think this album just kind of took like a sharp turn, and it's just, like I said, we wanted to for a couple of years to do something a bit different, but it just seemed like last time we kind of just got stuck in the same rut again, and this time we really did make the songs a bit shorter and a bit more compact and a bit sort of just more to the point. It just, I don't know, I think, at least for me, sometime in the middle of the last tour, it just got really boring live playing some of these 10-minute songs that were so progressive that you always had to sit there and think about, okay, this great big drum roll's coming up, or, this tempo change or whatever. I found that, the stuff that I was more into playing live was some of the simpler stuff that was more kind of groove, some of the stuff like Seek and Destroy or For Whom the Bell Tolls or that kind of stuff from our earlier albums, and it just seemed like to get back to that kind of thing now would be pretty cool. So we did, and most of the new songs are all pretty, almost, sometimes I don't like using the word simple because I think some people might take that negative, but it's like, here's a big guitar riff and the drums just kind of hang in the background, and it's just, here's a chorus and here's a guitar solo and here's the next song, instead of just kind of farting around with, going into all these different bits and stuff like that. I mean, we're going to different bits, but it's all separate songs instead of doing it all within one song. And that way it just kind of gets the songs a little more kind of bouncier and a little more groovy and stuff like that. I think this is a lot more of a guitar-oriented album.
As simple of a concept as this may have sounded, it can't be understated that even with their growing popularity, Metallica were the type of band who were known for their epic song journeys, and they were lauded for it. Shortening and grooving up the sound Metallica was a massive risk for the veterans of thrash metal, because if they messed it up, it would almost certainly alienate their hardcore fans, but as Hammett would explain, it was a risk that the band was willing to take.
Obviously we've had a lot of very positive, critical acclaim, and stuff like that, and a lot of people obviously always watching us, but I think we have this ability to shut that out when we sit down and write and stuff like that. And we never really, I don't know, for some reason we just were able to not worry about the fact that everybody's looking at us because, and just sort of, now we want to do this, and we don't really worry about, well, what's so-and-so going to think, and, this group of people, and that group. I mean, I think once you start worrying about all that stuff, then you're just going to start, running around in circles, and it's like a never-ending thing where you just always, if you're always trying to please somebody, I mean, we just please ourselves, and that's worked so far for the last 10 years.
But are the kids going to like this record?
Ask the kids when it comes out. I mean, it seems when we do something that is a sort of honest, I guess, interpretation or whatever of where our instincts and vibe is at that particular time, it always somehow ends, comes across, just like honest and stuff. And I think a lot of people pick up on that. That's what I'm saying. If we sat there and tried to sort of, think about, what we should do for people, or then I think it would end up sounding, contrived. And I think people would be able to see through that, like in, no time at all. And I don't know. I think people will at least know there's always going to be somebody who's going to, yell sell out or whatever. And I mean, we've been prepared for that for, many years.
With a clear vision and a strong will, Metallica would write the majority of their new sound demos for album number 5 in approximately 2 months in 1990. Writing, for what it's worth, has never been a weak spot for the group, who famously, to this very day, have albums worth of material just waiting to be released in a top-secret Metallica vault. But writing was only half the battle. Metallica knew that with this all-new direction and all-new sound, there could be absolutely no half measures. Their previous albums, while critically acclaimed, would almost always garner criticism of just how dry the songs could sound, full of treble, high notes, and machine gun percussion. From a production standpoint, at least, their music wasn't exactly being listened to for their rich oral textures or tone-setting bass lines. For the first time ever, the band understood that they didn't know everything there was about not only composing music, but producing it. And they were going to need someone to help guide them through the process if they were going to do it right. So, what did they do, you ask? Call in a Canadian, naturally. Originally feeling like they could do the production work themselves, Metallica believed that they were really just looking for someone to mix their next project to ensure that their instrumentation sounded tighter than ever. The guys were a fan of how fellow label mate Motley Crue's most recent effort, Dr. Feelgood, sounded, so it seemed a no-brainer to call in the producer of that album, the aptly named Bob Rock.
He's not your basic producer, I'd say. He's here, I think, a lot more than most. He's really into the project, and we just, getting a producer was kind of new to us too. So,
well, how'd you zero in on Bob? Like, why Bob?
I think, management suggested him, and we were really stuck. We had no idea what we wanted to do. We heard, I guess, a couple other projects he'd done before, and what we really wanted to focus on this time was getting bass guitar, on this album. So he's really good at that. He's got some pretty happening low end on some of his other stuff.
Rock, a Canadian producer with a bit of a CanCon lore in his own right, had a massive hit in the early 80s with his band, the Payolas. Their song Eyes of a Stranger would win a Juno Award for Best Single of the Year, and Rock himself would win a Juno for Recording Engineer of the Year for the accompanying album. While perhaps not a global superstar, Metallica did witness a bit of Bobomania here in Canada when they first agreed to work with him.
Plus, he's so famous in Canada. When we came up there, it was like the first night we went out together, we went to this establishment for a couple beverages, and we're just sitting there, and I could kind of out the corner of my eye see a couple kids coming over, pens and pieces of paper, and sign a couple autographs, and they just come over, completely ignore me and James, just, oh, Bob Rock, oh, wow, I can't believe I'm meeting you, would you sign these autographs, please? And then when Bob had signed the autographs, they just turned around and left. I was like, me and James didn't even exist. Me and James sat there and looked at each other, like, what? It's like, this guy's really famous up here, maybe we should hang with him.
One thing they didn't argue on, however, in all honesty, it would be the first of many things, was where the album was going to be recorded.
Did he try to convince you to do it in Vancouver?
Well, the day after that we hung with him up there, we went down and checked out Little Mountain, and see, how do I say this the best way?
Maybe David left some stuff there or something?
Well, let's see. How about just saying that it was not the kind of studio that we would want to make our next album in? I think I got out of that one pretty good. No disrespect. But so we kind of just said, look, we really kind of want to record in L.A., and at first he was a little not too keen on that because, he knows that studio and that's where his whole vibe is and stuff. But then we started, playing him some demos and we were communicating and stuff like that. And I think the more you heard the songs and the more, just the vibe kept getting better and better, the more he became into maybe taking it elsewhere than Vancouver.
With Vancouver out of the picture and Los Angeles chosen as their agreed-upon home base, Bob Rock would eventually wear the band down to the idea that he wasn't just going to mix their next record, he was going to produce the whole damn thing. Here's Rock and Ulrich telling much as Dan Gallagher on location at 101 Studios in Los Angeles about their shared vision during the final weeks of recording.
Anyway, I think, they approached me to mix, and I said that, sure, but I'd like to work with them through the whole album if they were into it, and I think something like that. And you guys kind of phoned back and said, well, maybe.
Yeah. Like I told you, we were like,
maybe, and then
Peter called up and said, he wants to produce you too. I'm like, yeah, sure. We're Metallica. Nobody produces us. Nobody tells us what to do.
One thing they said is they wanted to get the melodic part of their music brought out a little more, and they wanted to work on the feel a bit. And when they said that, I knew that I really wanted to work with them, and that's what we've been doing. That's why actually this band, I don't think you've ever recorded all together except for maybe the garage or anything.
No, not.
Yes, perhaps one of the biggest changes Bob Rock intended to make with Metallica's overreaching creative process was that he insisted that all four members record together in a somewhat live off-the-floor method, something, believe it or not, Metallica had never done before.
Funny, when we got into this, when we started talking about this in the earlier stages, I was mentioning that you could actually all play in the same room at the same time, and they were just like that. They weren't aware of that before.
We didn't know
You're
that.
kidding.
That's impossible.
And then they told me that for Justice, when they worked with Mike Klink, that Mike Klink, after, 2 months or something, he didn't even meet Kirk. So, I feel privileged that I actually met the guitar player.
And the joke was always that he never actually got a chance to even meet the lead guitar player. So
I got to meet
Bob's
Kirk.
in now, big time.
Yeah, I met all the guys in the band.
As Ulrich would explain, though, there were definite pros and cons to this style of production, namely the sheer amount of takes they would need in order to meet all of their extremely high standards.
And the way that we went about doing this was that instead of playing a song once or twice and you sit there and go, gee, now the red record button's on, and you start stiffening up and you get really tense, and it sounds like that. It's like Bob said, go out and play the song 30 times basically. So we'd sit here and play this song, everybody would be in the room here behind me, and I'd sit here and play the song 30 times, and by say maybe take 10, I would forget that I'm in a recording studio, and I would be on a stage in an arena, and then you take your mental and you just sort of, remove yourself from the studio, and then you get really loose, and that comes across. And that's kind of how we've been, going for it this time, and it's working really well. But the downside of it is that when you have 30 takes of a song, and you have to sit there and shift through 100 minutes of music, it's like that all of a sudden becomes a huge time-consuming thing where you have to sit there and, well, geez, take 22 better than take 19, or is take 18, the solo section, does that spark a little more than take 25? And it's that really kind of took me by surprise how long that editing process would take.
The finished project, eventually called Metallica, but more affectionately known by fans as the Black Album, thanks to its all-black album cover, save for a barely visible impression of the Gadsden flag snake, would be remixed in its entirety no less than 3 times, causing huge delays, and would end up costing more than $1 million to make. It would also cost a lot more to Metallica than just money, as the strains of aiming for musical perfection contributed to the simultaneous divorces of Ulrich, Mustaine, and Hammett. Hammett would tell Playboy, Lars, Jason, and I were going through divorces. I was an emotional wreck. I was trying to take those feelings of guilt and failure and channel them into the music to get something positive out of it. The Black Album's first single, Enter Sandman, would very quickly prove to the band and Bob Rock, who openly stated that he would never work with Metallica again, but would end up working with Metallica many, many more times, that all of this painstaking work was worth it, as it would help the record debut at number 1 on the Billboard Albums chart, with the single itself peaking at a resounding number 16 on the Hot 100 pop songs. Now overwhelmingly thought of as one of the best songs of all time, we'll save the ins and outs of Enter Sandman itself for a future episode of Encore, as it so rightfully deserves. Complete with its own music video, only the second video release in Metallica's history, and coming in at a tight 5.5 minutes, Metallica's fans were shocked, but intrigued by the band's new-ish direction.
This is like the record that it always sounded like we were trying to make, but just never really were able to like put together. And just, I think people, I don't know, a few people kind of like have been telling me that they were like a little freaked out right before they sat down and like check it out and stuff. But, you know, within about like 30 seconds or something, they just know that it's just good old Metallica, just sounding a lot better than we ever have before, you know, just guitars, drums, everything just come crushing at you, but it just sounds a lot bigger, it sounds a lot warmer, it sounds a lot more, kind of has a lot more emotion and stuff in it, and just the songs are just a little more condensed. I mean, I think people have been just making a little bit too big of an issue out of the whole thing with Bob Rock and the fact that we just changed, you know, the songwriting around a little bit.
The song's accessible melodies also didn't hurt in the way of opening the door for all new Metallica fans, as the band would tell Much.
But it seemed that a lot of people have embraced Metallica that never really gave Metallica, you know, a chance, and so it's pretty cool.
How do you feel about those new fans, those people that didn't know the old material and now like Metallica?
It's pretty interesting, you know, you look out into the audience and you see a lot of people that you wouldn't have seen out in the audience 5 years ago. You know, it's pretty different.
Yeah, I think it's too easy to sort of sit and go, yeah, all the latecomers or whatever, but you got to remember that there's so many people that it's because Metallica has always been so extreme that I've never really maybe had access to Metallica because we've never been on the radio or much on video channels or whatever, and it's like they're just getting a chance to hear about us now for the first time and hopefully finding out that it's something that they...
Second single, The Unforgiven, would continue the band's upward trajectory, flipping the concept of a power ballad on its head with heavy chugging verses and almost medieval-sounding classical guitar choruses. If you weren't drawn in by Sandman, The Unforgiven would almost certainly spark curiosity in the discerning music fan. By this point, sales of Metallica's self-titled were through the roof, going #1 all over the world, and by the beginning of 1992, the record was already 4 times platinum in the US alone.
Every day I get these faxes coming in from the office. The album's #1 in Australia, it's #1 in Norway, it's #1 in New Zealand, it's #1 in America, it's #1 in Canada. It's like, and in a way I almost feel like removed from it because we're just doing our own thing on tour, but obviously when I turn the lights off, I'm in the bedroom by myself. Yeah!
It really is a rock and roll dream come true, isn't it?
For lack of a better way of saying it, I mean, the one thing about Metallica is that we've never really been that career conscious. I mean, when we started this band 10 years ago, it was not like, oh, we're striving to be #1 all over the world or anything, but sure, I'll take it. And I think what's cool about it is that in a way it's like, when we started off, there were a lot of people that were laughing at us and pointing fingers with Metallica. They can't play, they can't write, they can't do anything. It's like, there's a major yeah, something like that to them. So it's like, I mean, from that point of view, it's just a great feeling.
Needless to say, we here in Canada were also pretty proud of our countryman Bob Rock for wrangling the sounds of the metal underground and putting them together in one rockin' package.
Well, I tell you, the reason I think most Canadians are excited because Bob Rock is Canadian. And, you know,
I know. We had, like, Canadian flags up in the studio.
I tell you, man.
It's just, you know, like, James is, you know, I'm Danish, so I have, like, my Danish flag on my drum kit as usual. And, you know, James has an American flag on his amps. And, you know, it didn't take Bob all but, like, 5 minutes to get, you know, a couple Canadian flags up in the studios. And we were, like, Battle of the Nations, you know, in the control room.
So when it was time to release single number 3, the band felt confident in releasing their secret weapon, the most vulnerable song on the record, Nothing Else Matters. In hindsight, it's hard to believe that Nothing Else Matters almost didn't make the cut for the album, and in another lifetime may have never seen the light of day. Written largely by James Hetfield as a personal piece of music while longing for his girlfriend on the road, it was only after James showed the deeply personal track to Lars Ulrich on a whim that he was convinced it was right for Metallica at all. Here's the band explaining the situation to Howard Stern in 2013.
I think Lars heard it and said, hey, that's really good. And I said, no, it's not.
How did Lars hear that song if you were ashamed of it?
How did you hear it?
You played it for me.
That's how he heard it.
So you weren't that ashamed. And Lars, did he come to you? Did James come to you and go, "Hey, man, I'm going to play something for you"?
No, I mean there's always been a very open door policy. I mean, we all trade. Usually, what would happen back in the early days is that when we would, after a tour, go on break, like James would give me all his ideas, Kurt would give me all his ideas. We'd all sort of trade ideas, and then we'd go away. And then when we'd start writing a few months later, everybody would kind of have an idea of what everybody else was bringing to the table.
And Lars, you knew that song was going to be a hit. You had an argument with the record company.
It wasn't so much about a hit. It was just more about a side of Metallica that I was really proud of, and I thought that everybody should see.
Were you scared that the fans would revolt when they heard such a beautiful ballad?
No, I think it's good to challenge the fans once in a while.
Next, of course, the band would bring the demo to Bob Rock, who, you guessed it, would make the guys record the track an ungodly amount of times before being meticulously combed over by Metallica, Rock, and their engineers.
You sit down and you got, 20, 30 takes of songs. Go film him or something. Go see that what he's doing now? He's putting pieces together. Isn't that exciting? Basically, Randy Razorblade, our brilliant engineer, he would then basically sit and cut the tape together. That way you find the bits that have the most spunk and the most vibe and the most attitude to it. We have about 250 fills for this song.
If you know anybody that needs a couple fills.
Yeah, if you know anybody, we have drum fills for sale.
We could have used some of these fills about 4 months back.
It got fun, actually, for a little while in the studio, experimenting with things. We tried a bunch of different shit, certain amps, like old thing at the Supro that Jimmy Page was using and shit. Some 12-string stuff, sitar thing on Wherever I May Roam. That's just the cool thing about guitar. You can kind of get a little wild with them.
With Rock's commitment to introducing Metallica to new instrumentation and new sounds, and Metallica's commitment to taking them on board, Hetfiled and the band found the necessary confidence to add Nothing Else Matters to the album.
With these songs, there was a lot more breathing space, and the vocals really had to take over on a lot of the songs. And a lot of the songs were based on vocal lines and things.
Fearing? Yeah. You're the almighty Hetfield.
The almighty...
You're a very fucking gutsy, brave man, I gotta tell you.
Yeah! And there's that solo. He helped out.
Exploding metal.
As far as giving me some confidence in things, because, nothing else matters. And nothing. What the hell you doing? The rest of the guys.
An underrated piece of Nothing Else Matters lore is that literally anyone can play it on guitar, or at least its opening riff. Tuned in standard E tuning, the opening sounds of the iconic song is simply open low E, followed by open G, open B, open high E, and then back up to B and G before repeating it all again. As long as you get the tempo right, you don't even have to put your hand on the neck of the guitar. Which is what makes the next bit of history about the song even funnier. Unlike almost any Metallica song before it, since joining in Time for Kill 'Em All, Kirk Hammett was actually not involved in the studio recording of Nothing Else Matters. The heart-wrenching guitar solo, arguably one of the most emotionally charged solos of all time, was a Hetfield original, written and recorded by the singer who usually played backup when it came to guitar parts. As Hammett would tell Village Voice in 2014, "We kept putting it in the set and taking it out until we were certain we actually were able to play it. I had to relearn that whole intro part to play it by myself on stage, which was a little bit intimidating for me at that point." It's for this reason that when it was released as a radio single in April of 1992, Hammett has admitted he actually only technically knew how to play it for a little over a month, with its first live performance coming on March 2nd of that year. Once fully exposed to the world at large, Nothing Else Matters became one of Metallica's calling cards, described by Bob Rock as a love song without saying the word love, a song that is huge and dramatic, but real. The concept of authenticity rings in every verse. Equal parts defiant, resilient, nostalgic, and vulnerable, it's truly one of music's most enduring and relatable songs. With Nothing Else Matters release, Metallica's Black Album would go on to sell another 2 million records in 1992 alone, and at last count, the record has shipped more than 16 million copies in the USA and over 31 million worldwide. With that many copies sold, there was a bit of backlash from the 90s metal hipsters of the world. But that wouldn't bother Lars and the guys.
I think people have been, there's always, somebody who's like, well, gee, they've sold 1 million records, now I hate them, just for the fact that, do you know what I mean? That whole kind of attitude. Sure. And there's always somebody, it's like, well, now, my next door neighbor knows about the band, so now I don't like them anymore because they're not my own band. That kind of thing. I mean, there's always going to be that kind of attitude, and it's something we've been living with for the last 6-8 years. But I think that it's been minimal, and I'm sure there's going to be somebody now going, oh, gee, they're writing short songs, now I hate them, or what. I mean, you know, the bottom line is that we have to please ourselves, and we're doing right now what we want to do.
Yeah, but those guys scare me. They don't go to the house very often, so you don't worry about it.
Eventually, Nothing Else Matters would transcend its original meaning, becoming a wedding song, a stadium anthem, or, as Howard Stern hypothesized, an ode to the ties of brotherhood.
What if I said to you that this song could possibly be James's song to Lars? What do you think of that?
Very true.
It's a love song to your brother Lars.
Yeah.
You probably didn't know that when you were writing it. You think you were writing it for a woman.
Start crying.
No, I'm serious.
You have to turn
face you.
You have to turn around and face me while you're singing.
But this is a beautiful love song that really came to be because, hey, Lars, you gave James the confidence to release this song.
I said, I just, you know, when I heard it, it was in a kind of a rough state. All the parts on it now weren't there, but when I heard the verses, I'd never heard James sing like that, and it just moved me, and I knew that this was something that we had to share with the rest of the world. He felt too vulnerable at that time to sort of let that out there, but I knew that this was something that had to be shared with everybody.
Nothing Else Matters would pop up again in late 1999 as a crucial part of Metallica's ambitious Symphony and Metallica project in collaboration with the San Francisco Symphony and conductor Michael Kamen. Released as the first single, the S&M version of the song is brilliantly reimagined with a full live orchestral backing, accentuating all the classically influenced instrumentation of the original in a truly timeless fashion. And while it would be hard to argue against Enter Sandman as the definitive Metallica song, I might suggest that you keep an open mind for a different view when it comes to the digital age. In August of 2021, Nothing Else Matters became the first Metallica song to hit 1 billion views, only the 6th song period to achieve that feat at the time. Sandman's numbers, a paltry 706 million. Pfft, we get more than that in one episode of Encore, naturally. In late 2021, Metallica released an outrageous 53-track tribute record called The Blacklist, with artists from all genres of music playing homage to their revolutionary album. While artists were encouraged to cover any track from the 1991 original, you guessed it, more artists chose Nothing Else Matters than any other song. Included on the mega album are reimaginings of Nothing Else Matters by Phoebe Bridgers, Dermot Kennedy, Chris Stapleton, amongst others, but the true crown jewel is the interpretation by Miley Cyrus featuring What, Yo-Yo Ma, Chad Smith of the Chili Peppers, current Metallica bassist Robert Trujillo, who replaced Jason Newsted after a public falling out, and a little artist named Elton John. Miley, Elton and Company's version is truly special, by the way. It's always impressive when Cyrus flexes her rock star chops, but the sheer reverence on display for the track truly bleeds through as the ultimate tribute, touching and invigorating. And this was no cynical endeavor either. Elton John would surprise Miley and Metallica to proclaim it one of the greatest songs ever written.
Miley, now, you covered this Metallica song, but Elton John plays piano on it. And with us right now is just Elton John to say hello. Look at you.
Oh, my God.
Hi, guys. Hi, Miley.
Hi,
Hello,
Great to
Elton.
see you.
How you doing?
Hey.
Elton, talk to me about Metallica for a second. For charity, you are putting out a new album, too. And this song that you did with Miley appears on both albums. It appears on Metallica's album, it appears on your new album. We're talking about Nothing Else Matters. Working with Miley and playing piano to a Metallica song, people would naturally think, oh, Elton John doesn't play a Metallica song. But this is kind of an Elton John song. It's a beautiful piano piece you do with this song.
Well, that idea came from Andrew Watt, who produced the track and played guitar on it. And he said, I want you to start the song and finish the song because I don't want it to start with the guitar because that's how the original record started. And listen, this is one of the best songs ever written to me. I mean, it's just, it's a song that never gets old. And playing on this track, I just couldn't wait because the chord structure, the melodies, the time changes, it's got drama written all over it. And I just thought it was a great idea to start with piano. I have to say, it was a no-brainer playing on this song. Metallica are probably, the creme de la creme of those kind of bands. You can't really define them. Not a heavy metal band, they're a musical band. Their songs aren't just heavy metal, they're beautiful songs. And this is such a melodic song. It's just It's fucking great, actually.
It really is fucking great, and I love the collaboration between you and Miley, and the way you interpreted it through piano. Is that a difficult thing to do?
I think because the song is so melodic, it's a very beautiful song. If you just take all the guitars and everything, just sing the song a cappella, it's a bit like Greensleeves. It's a beautiful melody. So, when you've got a beautiful melody to play to, with all the rest going on, it's a juxtaposition of musical instruments. And so I found it really easy. I mean, it's a kind of classical song. It's like a classical piece of music.
In the clip, a visibly emotional James Hetfield can't believe what he's hearing. Such high praise from one of his songwriting heroes was very clearly not something he'd expected at that moment. 30 years after, almost being too scared to show it to his own brothers in arms. Needless to say, the Black Album and its legendary singles minted Metallica as one of the world's greatest rock bands, full stop. Never too far away from internal turmoil, the late 90s into the early 2000s were a particularly tumultuous time for the group. The band would reunite with Mr. I'll Never Work With Him Again Bob Rock for 1996's Load, 97's Reload, 98's Garage Inc., and of course, 2003's infamous album Saint Anger. After a highly publicized lawsuit against file sharing service Napster in 2000 and the acrimonious departure of Jason Newsted in 2001, Bob Rock himself unofficially became a part of Metallica, serving as fill-in bassist on Saint Anger, an album described by Play Louder critic William Luff as a monolithic slab of noise, too dense and daunting to be truly enjoyable. Following the release of Saint Anger, Metallica would go on to release a documentary entitled Metallica, Some Kind of Monster, which would document the process of creating O3's disaster piece, losing Newsted, and hiring Trujillo. Among the topics uncovered in the film were James Hetfield's struggle with alcoholism and subsequent rehab stint, bringing in a therapist for band group therapy to try and avoid what felt like an inevitable breakup, and the latest resentment held against them by former bandmate Dave Mustaine. After a brief period away, Metallica would once again return in 2008 with a new lease on life and a new producer, the legendary Rick Rubin, who convinced the band to go back to their 80s sound that brought them so much early success with Death Magnetic. 2016's Hardwired to Self-Destruct would continue the modernized thrash metal trend for the band before going back to the well in 2020 for a second S&M symphony effort. Needless to say, Nothing Else Matters was released once again as a lead single from the live album, while slightly less symphonic in nature. This time, the final refrain includes a more than willing San Francisco crowd jubilantly singing along. At present, Metallica are still going strong. 2023's 72 Seasons has brought Metallica back in a big way with their M72 tour, promising to be their biggest tour ever, now on its third leg around the globe. Metallica are including what they're calling a no-repeat weekend, where they'll play a completely different set list in each town they visit, with back-to-back shows. One request for the Toronto show, though, lads, please play Nothing Else Matters on both dates, and maybe bring Miley and Elton. I'm Miles Galloway, and that was the story of Metallica's Nothing Else Matters on Encore, with new episodes every Thursday.
Encore is an iHeartRadio Canada podcast. Subscribe to this podcast on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts. Download the iHeartRadio app for more great podcasts just like these.